Welcome to the Right Take Podcast, news, ideas, and conversations at the intersection of politics and culture, a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. I will be your host, Mark Tapson. Greetings, and welcome back to the Right Take Podcast. I am your host, Mark Tapson. I hope those of you who celebrate Christmas had a very merry one, and that Santa brought you everything you wanted. I also hope you didn't forget the real reason for the season, which is, of course, celebrating the birth of Christ. You may recall that the previous Christmas time, in 2023, there was a controversy involving a Christian conservative man who tore down a display at the Iowa State Capitol building that was erected by the Iowa chapter of the Satanic Temple, which is an international organization that sort of bills itself as a religion for people who don't like traditional religion. That Christian conservative, Michael Cassidy, felt compelled to push back against the anti-Christian mockery of the exhibit, which was displayed near a nativity scene displayed for Christmas time, of course. He decided to strike a literal and symbolic blow against a shrine that was erected right there in the state capitol building in honor of the ultimate symbol of evil, Satan. So he pushed this goat-headed, pentagram-adorned display to the floor, after which he turned himself into the police, and he was ultimately charged with fourth-degree criminal mischief. He quickly made headlines after that, even though he's a humble guy whose intention was not to draw attention to himself, but to follow his conscience and take a stand for his Christian faith. I actually had Michael on this show a year ago in the wake of that controversy, and today I have him back on The Right Take again because there are some new developments in his legal case, and also I want to talk to him about the state of Christianity in America today and about his next steps, his plans for the future, and other stuff. So please stay with us here at the intersection of politics and culture. Michael Cassidy will be coming up momentarily as a guest. You don't want to miss this interview, and don't forget to subscribe to The Right Take so that you don't miss any of the other important conversations we are having here. And remember, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review. Don't touch that dial. My guest today at the intersection of politics and culture is Michael Cassidy, the man at the center of the controversy over the tearing down of the Satanic Temple exhibit at the Iowa State Capitol building a little over a year ago. He's from Maryland, but a Missouri citizen now, I believe, former Navy pilot and flight instructor and former congressional candidate in that state. Michael, welcome back to the Right Take podcast.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, did I get that right? It's Missouri where you still reside?
Close. Mississippi.
Oh, Mississippi.
Yeah.
Something wasn't right about that. All right, Mississippi.
Yeah, no worries.
And do you still fly for the Navy Reserves?
Well, that's a great question. I'm still in the Navy Reserves. They haven't let me fly for the past year because of what's going on here, but that's something we can maybe get into in a little bit more detail later on.
Yeah, I wondered about that. Well, let's just back up a little bit then and bring people up to speed. Please describe briefly what happened that day that you took down the Satanic Temple display.
Sure. I guess it was in 2023, so a little over a year ago now, the Iowa Satanic Temple decided to put up a statue of the devil inside of the Iowa State Capitol. They had a 2-week permit. It went viral online after about a week, and it got a whole lot of attention across the country. There's a lot of pushback, including pressure on the governor and all sorts of things, but it stayed up. And I live in Mississippi. I'm not from Iowa, but I'm a believing Christian, and it just struck a wrong nerve, and so I saw that it was still up there after a few days after it went viral. So I told my boss that I needed to take a day off, and so I flew up that evening up to Iowa and went into the Capitol the next morning, and didn't know if there was going to be security there or what was going to happen, but I saw there's nobody there. The statue is there. It was evil. It shouldn't have been up there, and so I dismantled it.
I think that shows just amazing commitment that you were curious enough and outraged enough to literally cross state lines to go look at this thing yourself and experience it for yourself, and then to take action about it. You later told journalists that Scripture exhorts us to think and act like Jesus Christ. Now, many people think acting like Jesus means being really tolerant and non-judgmental, but Jesus angrily overturned the tables of the money changers in the Jerusalem temple, and I think it was in that vein that you viewed that monument or display from the Satanic Temple in that building, and found it to be kind of a perversion of the state building's purpose to serve the public good. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. That there is certainly more to Scripture than turning the other cheek, which is, of course, legitimate, and everything what God said is correct and righteous. But there's a specific context for that, and then there's also specific context or response required when God is being mocked, when Satanism, when anti-Christian actions are being promulgated by state authority. That is something that clearly should not be. That is not what any Christian should expect out of their government, and especially in a country like our own. There are some people that have used the example of Paul, not necessarily, tearing down the Greek goddess statues in Athens in the book of Acts, but there's as a reason to not tear down a satanic statue. But as you just mentioned, there's also the example of Christ in with the money changers, and there's also just the general instruction to oppose the works of the devil, and certainly a statue of the devil is a work of the devil.
And that Satanic Temple display was there very close to the nativity scene that had been erected at that state capitol. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. It was right maybe 10 feet away or so.
So it seems to me like it was clearly designed to maybe intimidate is the wrong word, but to aggravate, or as a kind of a challenge to the Christian display that was in the state capitol. So you knew that you were taking an action that would have legal consequences, and you actually turned yourself into police, or at least to the state security there, and you were arrested for fourth-degree criminal mischief. And what happened after that?
I got the citation after I turned myself in, and then about a month and a half afterwards, at the end of January, the district attorney for the state of Iowa, who she campaigned on all sorts of leftist versions of equity, and was funded by George Soros, that she decided to up the normal small criminal mischief charge to a felony hate crime charge. That they took the valuation of the demonic statue as gospel, ironically enough, to up the value of it when it was, I had it in my hands. It was not, beyond any sort of spiritual lack of value. It was a very cheaply constructed thing. It was made out of pool noodles. And then the hate crime thing, of course, is just simply absurd. If you want to say, do I hate the devil? I certainly hate the devil, but that was a statue, an inanimate statue of a group. It's not what even the hate crime statute even covers. So it was all absurd, but yeah. So they charged me with that felony. What they really had in mind is they were trying to bully me into accepting a plea deal that had the hate crime attached to it, so that way they could claim that, hey, we've shown that this guy, he's this hateful man, and against this righteous group, the Satanic Temple. But really, but we didn't back down, because I wasn't going to plead guilty to any hate crime. I told them that I did do some degree of damage to somebody's property, and that's why I turned myself in. Like, I'm not above the law by any means. None of us are above the law, and so I was willing to have consequences for those actions, which is why I turned myself in. And so eventually, as we got really close to the trial, the state backed down and they said, okay, we'll drop the hate crime charge, and we'll offer this. It's called a deferred judgment, where basically I'm on probation for another few months, in essence, and I paid a fine, and then the misdemeanor charge goes away completely. So it was all performative by the state. They were just really trying to intimidate people like us, I guess.
And so where do things stand for you now legally?
So legally, I'm on probation. I've probably got another 4 months of probation with Iowa, but that's with Iowa. But the more, I guess, lasting effects have been within the Navy and the Navy's own judicial system, if we can call it that.
How did your actions impact your relationship with the Navy?
So I'll start off by emphasizing that my views are not those of the Department of Defense, which is kind of a classic disclaimer that anybody in the military has to say before they talk about things related to the military. I'm in the Navy Reserves. I've been in the Reserves for about 4 years now. When I was active duty, I flew jets for the Navy, including the F-18, and then I came to Mississippi to be an instructor pilot in a smaller jet called the T-45 Goshawk. I did that for a few years active duty, got off active duty, became a reservist, and did the same thing as a reservist, just a part-time role. And so the Navy, they decided that two things. One, they didn't think that I should fly anymore. Even I wasn't on Navy orders or anything like that, but they've essentially declared me. They think that I'm guilty of being a domestic extremist, and I have that charge. In fact, in addition to really in conjunction with the not being able to fly to do my job as a pilot, they are charging me on the administrative side, trying to kick me out of the Navy for this. And I don't have a set date for that hearing. I was told about this back in October, I think. And ironically, the last day that I heard anything from the Navy about this was the morning of Election Day, and they've been curiously quiet about any sort of follow-up in the 2 months since November the 5th. So, I'm feeling pretty optimistic. I think that the winds are shifting, and hopefully the people in higher leadership they either see that in the future or they'll see it once it happens.
Yeah, you've actually anticipated a couple of questions of mine. One is that, did they actually use the language domestic extremist? Is that how they referred to you?
I remember it definitely has extremism in the charge, and it's part of that the charge derives from a policy from, I think, 2021, right when this administration took over, that is all about domestic extremism. So it doesn't say exactly, those two words don't go right next to each other, but it's what they're charging me with.
As I said, that anticipates one of my questions. When you consider that under the Biden administration, that Homeland Security and the FBI have been directed to turn their focus on, middle-aged or older pro-life activists and parents who complain about local school boards and the gender indoctrination of their kids, it's hard not to conclude that Christians in this country, at least under the Biden administration, are being viewed as domestic extremists. While the actual domestic extremists like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and even ISIS followers get something of a pass. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100%. And a perfect example of that is that the Antifa rioters, that they back in late May of 2020, there was a mob that they injured several dozen Secret Service members as they were trying to break into the White House to attack Trump. There's pictures, there's video of it, but the mainstream media didn't talk about it because it was, guys on their side that were doing the amounts of violence that I would say there's an argument to be made may have been the amount of violence on par with or in excess of the handful of bad actors on January 6th that nobody can stop talking about. Whereas Antifa did this. In fact, and just a couple of days ago, we saw the man in New Orleans who was part of the army that was sympathetic to ISIS, and he killed 15 people. But that's that's not who Mark Milley was going after. That's not they're going after people like in Fort Bragg, just like you alluded to, that they had a PowerPoint presentation, annual training that labeled pro-life groups as being examples of domestic terrorists. It's completely, this administration has had completely backward priorities. They've been anti-Christian, they've been anti-conservative, they've been anti-pro-life. It's been terrible.
And are you optimistic that things will change under the forthcoming Trump administration?
I'm very optimistic. But the only reason why I say but is simply that we can't just rest on our laurels and say, hey, this is great. Trump won the election. Everything's going to be great. Because we kind of saw that in 2016, that Trump won, and we didn't. I know I'll speak for myself. I underestimated how much bureaucratic resistance there was going to be to a lot of the policies, and that a lot of people that even filled some of those middle or upper echelon roles were people that were of the establishment and that weren't going to change anything. And so I think we've got a much better idea collectively of the problems that exist. We just need to make sure that we get people like Pete Hegseth needs to get confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, as all sorts of, so we need to follow through on that victory. And that's the only caution, is we can't just put our feet up and say, yeah, everything's going to be okay. No, we've got to now follow through on that victory.
I totally agree. And I think Trump himself underestimated the amount of deep state resistance that he was going to get when he took office. I think he learned a lot from that first administration, and you can see that in the pretty unorthodox people that he has chosen for his incoming administration. You can see he's wised up about the people to surround himself with. So I hope that will make a big difference. Let me get back to your personal case real quickly. I don't suppose there's any way that people can help with the remainder of your legal situation. I know, is it just kind of a wait and see situation with the Navy?
That's a great question. We were blessed enough last year to, when this all came out, that we a group called the Republic Sentinel, they started a Give Send Go for me, and we've raised enough money that we should be able to cover any of the legal fees that remain with the Navy if this case does indeed go to a board. I'm optimistic that it won't, but I'm hesitant to. I don't want to just ask people for money if I think we've got enough, if that makes sense. That Give Send Go, it's still active with my name. Any extra funds we have are going to go to some sort of group or groups that help support cases like mine, because even if we don't have, like, Christians, mainly in the military, that we're not going to, in the upcoming Trump administration, I don't think we're going to have, like, if Trump were in charge when I did what I did, the Navy would not be trying to kick me out for being a domestic extremist. But what we might start seeing happening is, let's say a commander has a Christmas tree up on base in their work zone of their squadron. You might see somebody who sues the commander or accuses them of being religiously intolerant, let's say. And now the commander, maybe if we haven't gotten enough of the bad blood out of the DoD, maybe they're going to be penalized by higher authorities, or maybe they need to seek legal counsel to defend, having a Christmas tree on display at a squadron. And that's something where maybe a group like that could, defend that person. Hopefully we don't have any of the cases like what's happening with me at the federal level. There might be some guard cases. Anyway, so that's a little bit of a longer, that the money will go to some cause like that. It's not being used for other causes.
Back when you were embroiled in this controversy, a writer named Rod Dreher wrote about the issue and said, and I'm going to quote him here, "Michael Cassidy understands that the spiritual power of that evil statue is real, and that there are higher obligations on the Christian than are allowed for under liberalism's rules," unquote. What do you think will happen, or maybe even should happen, to a society that gives equal weight to good and evil out of some misguided sense of fairness and tolerance and diversity?
I think it's a misorder of our priorities, of what God tells us to do. I think that this is unfortunately a very common thought among people, even a lot of Christians, I think. I was listening to a recent an old interview from Jimmy Carter, because he just passed away a few days ago, and in it he was asked about his obligations as a Christian when he was president. And he basically said, well, I swore an oath to the Constitution, and therefore I have to leave my religion at the door. And so he used that to justify supporting abortion, for instance. And the question that Christians ought to have on their hearts is, what are you going to say to Christ on that last day that you thought that there are things that are more important than what he has told us, what he has told you through his word and his teachings? And that's a question that we all have to work out in our own hearts. What does that mean? But I don't think that it means that the answers that many of our leaders have been giving us, that, we have to tolerate satanic statues in display. We have to tolerate the promulgation of evil. No, that's not what Christ calls us to do, to tolerate evil.
Yeah, I think a lot of classical liberals, and I actually consider myself one of those, forget that that evil is real, and that evil will exploit the fair-mindedness and tolerance of classical liberalism in order to get first a foot in the door and then to smash the door off its hinges completely and undermine or subvert that classically liberal civilization. So I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. A few weeks ago, I wrote an article about another Satanic Temple memorial that was toppled. This one was installed on a Concord City plaza by the New Hampshire branch of the Satanic Temple, and it was destroyed literally, I think, overnight after being erected. Although, excuse me, unlike you, the person responsible for it did not turn himself or herself or themselves in. That wasn't you, was it?
As a condition of my probation, I'm not supposed to do things like that for the next year or so. But no, it was not. It was not me. One of those men actually did just come forward. I saw, I think yesterday, maybe. His name's Joshua Cummings, and he went public himself. He wasn't doxxed or anything like that. And he said that it was actually, there's several people that he got knocked down several different times, and he knocked it down at least once, maybe a couple of times. But I'm glad that, like, one of the things that I hope people take from what I did is that you should not just tolerate evil. And if it's something that is, now that doesn't mean that's not an unfettered call to violence against, bad people. But that's one thing that this guy, Mr. Cummings, he said, this thing's a mile down the road from my house. I could not sleep with myself thinking about it, a statue of the devil a mile from my house. And that's what I want Christians to think about. Think about what evils are within a mile from your house. It doesn't have to be something 4 states away or however far away Iowa is from Mississippi. But start thinking about the evils that exist in your community and, speak up about them. Speak up, try to get other people on your side, talk to city councilors, talk to board of supervisors, your legislator, and use public pressure, or even the government power if you know somebody who can wield that power as a Christian and stop this. If we just take things lying down, we're going to keep taking things lying down. The other side is very active and wants to win, and we Christians need to want to win to keep our communities, our society safe for the expression of our own worship and for the safety of our children and grandchildren.
Yes, and that's a very good point about taking action locally, because I tend to write in big civilizational terms about things, but it's really locally where people have to take action. That's how you end up, in the long run, defending your civilization. Let's pivot to a related topic about our misguided tolerance of evil in this country, and that's the recent terrorist attack in New Orleans, which was perpetrated by an avowed follower of ISIS, the Islamic State. I wrote about this too, twice actually in the last couple of days, and one of my points was that we in the West, in the Western world, had better abandon this suicidal tolerance that we have tragically adopted as a cultural value and start putting on the full armor of God and defending our civilization, which used to be called Christendom, by the way. Western civilization used to be known as Christendom. Now, I follow you on X, or what used to be called and still should be called Twitter, and I agree with literally 100% of your posts, so I suspect you would agree with me on that.
Yes, I do, and I think that we need to, I'm not sure how it happened or what the time frame of Christendom merge or becoming Western civilization. It's something that, a term I use, Western civilization, for the overwhelming most part, because I'm not sure that if I were to speak about Christendom, I'm not sure you could speak about, countries that made up Christendom, but to say, like, our country, we tolerate 1 million babies being killed every single year. I don't know if we can call ourselves a truly Christian country anymore. I think it's made up of a whole lot of Christians, and it's based on Christian values. That is 100% for sure, that our founders, the founding documents, that all of that those were made by committed Christians. But we need to wake up. That's what we honestly, we need a revival within our country to take back that title that we've laid on the wayside historically.
Yeah, I think we definitely live in a post-Christian country and civilization, and that's a storm we're really going to have to weather in order to try to reclaim that. And I think we talked about this last time, but it bears repeating. Would you agree with me that in America today, we are engaged not just in political warfare, but in spiritual warfare as well? And if so, what would you suggest we do to win that battle?
I certainly agree with you on that. How we fight back is, first one of the things we have to do first is identify what the problem is, and that there is a spiritual animosity between what we Christians believe and people that are attacking Christianity, and that we can't just You can't just say, well, this man in Texas, he just lost his mind and went crazy, and it's some isolated incident, and let's just forget about it. No, that there has been for 1,400 years, a war being fought against primarily Christians in originally the Middle East, and then it spread through North Africa and Europe. And that was the Islamic expansion of the 7th and then through the 7th century through the 17th century. And then it's had a resurgence in recent decades. And the doctrine has not changed. There is somebody posted a tweet a day or two ago, or a post, that this guy, he wasn't a radical Islamist, he was following Islam. And that the people who, that consider themselves Muslims, that are, peaceful and are, love and they're friendly, well, they're probably not adhering to all the tenets of the Islamic religion. And we just have to, it's an uncomfortable thing to say, but it's something that we have to be honest with ourselves about the evils of a explicitly anti-Christian doctrine. And to be clear, it's not people per se. It's not the people that they are, lost to any cause that we can't, they're not recoverable by any means, but the ideology that leads them to drive a truck down a city street in America, that leads them to drive a car or a truck in a Christmas market in Germany. This is something that we have to face dead on, and we can't ignore it, or else our civilization will continue to fall apart at the seams.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to your point about whether or not this New Orleans terrorists and others like him are radicals, I never refer to them as radicals. I always refer to them as fundamentalists, or terror groups like ISIS or Al Qaeda. I refer to them as Islamic fundamentalists because they're actually operating out of the fundamentals of their religion, not some radicalization of it. If all goes well, Donald Trump and his team of, as I mentioned, unorthodox choices for his administration are going to be settling in pretty soon. What are a couple of things that you would like to see them do right out of the gate?
I hope that Pete Hegseth gets confirmed as Secretary of Defense things on day one. Certainly, I would love to see some people pardoned, particularly the nonviolent J6ers, the pro-life protesters. I would like to, ideally, I'm not holding my breath, but I'd like to see, there's a lot that I'd like to see. In terms of realistic things, those are a couple, and I certainly would like there to be some accountability, some sort of, whether it's a commission that's been discussed, a commission for the military that goes into multiple commissions, honestly. One that goes after waste within the Department of Defense. One looks at getting rid of DEI in the Department of Defense. One that, unfortunately, evaluates the criminality that there have been that has existed in my case, for whistleblower retaliation and other anti-Christian activities within the Department of Defense. There must be light thrown on those cases, and the people who have done illegal or anti-Christian policies or actions, they need to be removed from their positions of power. And again, I say that not speaking on behalf of the Department of Defense.
Sure. Right. Well, what is happening for you next? You had run for Congress a while back in Mississippi, and the last time we spoke, I asked you if you were contemplating another political run, and if I remember right, you seemed uninterested at the time, or maybe too preoccupied with your legal situation to even contemplate it, but you didn't seem very interested in continuing to pursue politics. Have you changed your mind about that since?
I certainly was. When we spoke last, I had other things on my plate. Right now, it's the beginning of 2025. Things could change, and I mean, there's always a chance of getting into politics again. I'm certainly interested in politics. Whether I think that what my role is, I'm not sure. I'm cautiously optimistic that with unified control of the both houses in the House and the Senate and the presidency, that we can get some good things done. But if it looks like if we need different people in there, or if people resign, then I'm not going to close any doors. But I don't have any explicit plans at the moment. But I'm not closing any doors.
Yeah. And would you consider something outside the realm of politics, some form of nonprofit activism or something? Because I would love to see you in some kind of a leadership role of some organization that would, act upon some of the things that we've been talking about today. I would hate to see your commitment to those values and your the spirit that you have. I'd hate to see that go to waste. So what about outside of politics? Any thoughts about a direction you could take?
I've thought about it. I want to see my case with the Navy resolved first before I make any big moves one way or the other. My civilian job until just a few months ago was working on the Navy base flying jets in a civilian capacity. So I really would like that back. I love flying, and they haven't let me do that. If that doesn't get resolved favorably, then I could see myself being more open to doing something like what you described. But I'm not quite sure at the moment, I'll be honest.
Well, I could certainly understand you being hesitant about getting involved in politics. I can't think of anything worse. I don't really consider myself an activist except to the extent that I'm a writer and I just kind of get my opinions out there. But I can't think of anything worse than diving into the realm of politics. I mean, thank goodness there are people who are willing to get in that fight. And it's a fight we need to be involved in, but that is just not a fight I want to have anything to do with, except to comment upon it from the outside. As I mentioned a moment ago, I follow you on Twitter or X. Is that the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, I don't have a website or Facebook. That's all inactive essentially. The best way to keep track of me would be on X, and that's just my name, Michael Cassidy.
That's great. Well, Michael Cassidy, thanks again for taking a stand in defense of God and country, and thanks for making the time to join us again today at the Right Take Podcast.
Thank you, Mark. I enjoyed being on here. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Listeners, don't forget to subscribe to The Right Take so that you don't miss any of the important conversations we're having here. And remember, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review. See you next time. The Right Take with Mark Tapson is a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Front Page Magazine. Unauthorized reproduction of this podcast without express written consent is prohibited.